The holding facility smelled like ozone and disinfectant, a sterile attempt to mask something older, something that didn't belong to Earth's periodic table. I stood outside Cell 7, Level 4, Deep Springs Research Station, Nevada, watching condensation form on the triple-layered observation glass. My breath clouded in the cold air they kept pumping through the corridors. Protocol, they said. Temperature regulation for the specimen. I hate that word. Specimen. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, xenobiological consultant, though my PhD in astrobiology had prepared me for microbial life on Europa's ice. Not this. Not a living, breathing contradiction to everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. It had been 3 weeks since the crash in the Mojave. No explosion, no fire. Just a geometric impossibility half buried in sand, and inside, a single occupant. Alive. Conscious. Waiting. The military wanted answers. The scientific community wanted data. I wanted to understand why, when our team first approached with radiation suits and drawn weapons, it had simply raised what we assumed were hands and stopped moving. Surrender, or something like it. They brought me in because I had published on the Drake equation, on the Fermi paradox, on the statistical likelihood that we were alone. I'd spent my career arguing we weren't. Now, standing before living proof, I felt none of the vindication I'd imagined. Only a cold certainty settling in my chest, like lead. Because in those first 72 hours of observation, before any communication was established, I'd noticed something the generals and the engineers had missed. The being wasn't trying to escape. It wasn't trying to repair its craft. It was simply watching us. Through walls, through cameras, through the one-way mirror of our collective denial, watching us like a researcher watches lab rats. This morning, the linguistics AI finally cracked a pattern in the electromagnetic pulses it had been emitting. Not language, exactly. More like transmission. And the first translated phrase appeared on my screen at or form 47 hours. The harvest window closes at solar conjunction. We should talk. I pressed my palm against the glass. Inside, in the dim blue light, something that looked almost human, but wasn't, turned its head toward me. Then I understood. We weren't having first contact. We were having final review. My days had settled into a rhythm that felt surreal in its mundanity. Wake at 0600, security clearance check. Descend 14 levels into a mountain that officially doesn't exist. Sit across bulletproof glass from a being that had crossed distances our fastest probes won't reach for 10,000 years. And talk. Or rather, watch symbols scroll across a screen while trying to reconcile the fact that the entity in Cell 7 communicated through modulated electromagnetic fields our equipment could barely translate. Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead linguist, called it semantic radiation. I called it proof that language itself might be a human limitation. The facility operated on military precision. Guards rotated every 4 hours. Air samples were taken twice daily. Everything the entity touched, the few objects we'd introduced as cognitive tests, was cataloged, photographed, analyzed for cellular residue, chemical traces, anything that might explain how biology could survive conditions that should have liquefied human tissue. It didn't eat, didn't sleep in any pattern we recognized. Sometimes it stood motionless for 16 hours. Other times it moved through what looked like deliberate exercises, stretches, perhaps, or rituals we lacked context to interpret. Its form was bipedal, roughly humanoid, but the proportions were wrong in ways that triggered instinctive unease. Longer fingers, eyes set slightly too far apart, skin that seemed to shift between gray and silver depending on the light, as though it couldn't quite settle on a fixed state. Dr. Webb had a theory, mimicry, that the form we were seeing was an approximation, a biological compromise to appear less threatening. I had a darker thought, that this was the version of itself it needed us to see, to keep us calm enough to complete whatever assessment it had come to perform. The crash site yielded more questions than answers. The craft, if we could call it that, was partially composed of materials that existed in states our physics didn't account for. Solid and liquid simultaneously. Room temperature superconductors. Alloys that seemed to repair microscopic damage in real time. The engineers had removed a panel for analysis. By morning, the surface had reformed seamlessly. General Patricia Harding wanted weapons applications. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, our materials scientist, wanted to understand the principles. I wanted to know why something capable of constructing such technology had allowed itself to be captured without resistance. Maybe it's a scout, Webb suggested during our morning briefing. First contact protocol. Assess before full engagement. Or it's sick, Tanaka countered. Damaged. This could be a distress scenario, not an invasion. I said nothing. Because I'd been reviewing the electromagnetic logs, the patterns the AI had flagged as potentially meaningful. And I'd found something they'd missed. Repetition. The same pulse sequence every 27 hours like clockwork. Not distress, not communication. A signal. Outbound it was reporting. That afternoon, I requested solo observation time. Harding denied it. Protocol required minimum 2 personnel during any direct interaction. I went anyway, citing Section 14.7 of the Research Charter, principal investigator discretion in non-hazardous evaluation scenarios. The guard outside cell 7 checked my credentials twice, then unsealed the first door. The airlock hissed, pressure equalized. The inner door opened onto a space designed to be neutral. White walls, indirect lighting, a simple metal chair on each side of a transparent barrier. The entity was already seated. Up close, the wrongness intensified. Its chest rose and fell, but the rhythm was too slow, too measured. Its hands rested on the table, and I could see now that the fingers had no nails, no visible joints. They moved with the fluid continuity of tentacles shaped like human digits. I sat, activated the translation interface, spoke clearly into the microphone. "Can you understand me?" The screen flickered. Symbols cascaded. Then English appeared. "Understanding is mutual. You comprehend sound. I comprehend intent. We meet halfway." "Why did you come here?" "Correction. Why did I return?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I forced my voice steady. "You've been here before." "We have always been here. Monitoring, adjusting, recording. This iteration shows promising complexity. Also concerning instability. Iteration?" The entity tilted its head. "A gesture too human to be coincidence, too precise to be mimicry. Your species designation. Homo sapiens sapiens. Subspecies 7. Iteration 12 of baseline hominid cognitive template. Previous versions discontinued due to developmental dead ends or environmental incompatibility." My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the table. "You're saying humans are engineered?" "Cultivated. Modified. Observed across 200,000 solar cycles. Your adaptation, not creation. We corrected aggression thresholds after iteration 9. Enhanced pattern recognition after iteration 10. Current model shows unprecedented technological acceleration. Who authorized this?" For the first time, something like emotion registered in its posture. A subtle contraction, as though the question itself was painful. The gardeners do not require authorization. We tend, we harvest. We document what emerges when consciousness is seeded in viable ecosystems. Harvest. Yes, the word hung between us like a blade. What does that mean? What are you harvesting? The entity stood, moved to the glass, placed one hand against it, directly opposite where my palm had pressed hours earlier. Potential. Data. Proof that intelligence is replicable. Your species has reached decision threshold. You will either transcend self-destructive patterns or repeat the failure cascade we have observed 1,147 times across this galactic sector. And if we fail? Sterilization. Ecosystem reset. New iteration begins in 50,000 years with corrected parameters. I couldn't breathe. When? Solar conjunction. 14 Earth days. The council convenes. Your civilization's continuation is subject to review. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the crash site again. That impossible geometry half buried in sand. Not a malfunction. Not an accident. A arrival. Deliberate. Timed. By 0400, I was back in the observation lab, cycling through 3 weeks of recorded interactions. Webb had gone home. Tanaka was asleep in her quarters. I was alone with terabytes of data and a truth I couldn't yet frame in language the review committee would accept. Because if I walked into General Harding's office and said, "The alien is here to evaluate whether humanity deserves to continue existing," I'd be removed from the project. Psychiatric evaluation, national security risk. They'd replace me with someone who'd interpret the entity's statements as manipulation, psychological warfare, an attempt to destabilize. But I'd seen its face when it mentioned the gardeners. That wasn't manipulation. That was grief. I pulled up the linguistic analysis, searching for patterns Webb might have dismissed as noise. The AI had flagged 127 untranslated phrases, semantic gaps where the entity's electromagnetic pulses carried meaning our framework couldn't parse. I ran them through a secondary algorithm, one designed for interpreting emotion in non-human communication. The results made my blood run cold. Regret, sorrow, resignation. It didn't want to be here. Didn't want to deliver this message. It was following protocol, an agent of something vast and ancient and utterly indifferent to human suffering, a gardener deciding which plants to cull. I accessed the outbound signal logs, the 27-hour pulse I'd noticed, used the translation matrix to attempt a crude interpretation. The AI struggled, spat out fragments. Specimen compliance acceptable. Cognitive metrics within parameters. Recommendation pending final evaluation. A report card. We were being graded. At Aero 620, my security phone buzzed. Harding's voice clipped and urgent. "Chen, conference room. Now." The room was full when I arrived. Harding at the head of the table. Secretary of Defense Whitmore on video link. Dr. Webb looking like he hadn't slept either. Tanaka. 3 officials I didn't recognize, CIA or NSA by the cut of their suits. Harding didn't waste time. Dr. Chen, you had unauthorized solo contact with the entity yesterday. Explain. I'd prepared for this, kept my voice level. Research Protocol 14.7, non-hazardous observational. We know the regulation, Whitmore interrupted. What did it tell you? The room went silent, everyone leaning forward. I made a decision, not the safe one. It claims to be part of an organization, the Gardeners, that has been monitoring and modifying human evolution for 200,000 years. It says we're iteration 12 of a larger experiment, and it's here to assess whether our species should be allowed to continue. Someone laughed, nervous, disbelieving. Harding's expression didn't change. Assessment criteria? Unknown, but there's a deadline, solar conjunction. 14 days. Whitmore leaned into the camera. Dr. Chen, do you believe this creature is telling the truth? I thought about the grief in its posture, the precision of its language, the fact that it had surrendered without resistance, not out of weakness, but because resistance was irrelevant. It was here to observe, not to escape. Yes, sir, I do. The room erupted. Webb arguing about psychological manipulation, one of the suits demanding enhanced interrogation, Tanaka trying to propose material analysis as verification method. Harding silenced them with a raised hand. If this assessment is real, we need to understand the criteria. Chen, you've established communication. I want a full interview protocol. Every question logged, every response analyzed. We have 2 weeks to figure out how to pass a test we didn't know we were taking. And if we can't? I asked. Harding met my eyes. For the first time since the crash, I saw fear in her face. Then we find out what sterilization means. I spent the next 72 hours in cell 7, eating meals brought by guards, sleeping 3 hours at a stretch in the observation room, asking questions while the entity, I'd started thinking of it as the witness, though it had never provided a name, responded with the patience of something that had watched civilizations rise and fall like seasonal vegetation. I learned the Gardeners were old, older than our sun, a collective intelligence distributed across thousands of worlds, united by a single purpose, cultivating complexity. They seeded planets, adjusted variables, harvested data. Not gods, not conquerors. Agricultural researchers on a cosmic scale. Humanity wasn't special. We were one crop in an infinite field. Promising, perhaps. But promise without stability was just another failed experiment. What happened to the other iterations? I asked on day 3. Iteration 4 developed space travel, but destroyed themselves in resource wars before achieving system colonization. Iteration 7 achieved sustainable civilization, but stagnated culturally. No innovation for 100,000 years. Iteration 9 was discontinued due to excessive aggression. They would have threatened other cultivated species. And us, Iteration 12? You are the most technologically advanced, also the most self-destructive. You have split the atom, mapped your genome, touched neighboring worlds. You have also weaponized all of it, built extinction into your own hands. So we're being judged for defending ourselves? The witness did that head tilt again. Almost sad. You're being evaluated for what you defend. Tribes, nations, ideologies, resources. You fight over divisions you created. The question before the council is simple. If you achieve interstellar capacity in your current state, do you become partners in cultivation, or a threat requiring containment? What would make us partners? Evidence of transcendence, unified response to existential challenge, prioritization of species, survival over tribal dominance. I sat back, understanding dawning like cold sunrise. You're not just evaluating. You're testing. This conversation, the crash, all of it, you're watching how we react to you. Correct. First contact is the ultimate filter. Species that respond with curiosity and cooperation may be ready. Species that respond with fear and violence get reset. Yes. How are we doing? The witness placed both hands on the table. Its eyes, dark, depthless, held something I couldn't name. You isolated me, imprisoned me, studied me as threat and resource simultaneously. Your governments debate whether to dissect or weaponize. Your scientists see opportunity for advancement. Your military sees tactical advantage. But not everyone. You, Dr. Chen, see a person. You ask questions to understand, not to exploit. This is noted. It is also insufficient. My chest tightened. One person's decency doesn't save a species. No. But it suggests the template is viable. That iteration 12 contains individuals capable of the leap, whether you collectively make it. The witness stood, walked to the glass, pressed its hand to the surface. That is what we are here to witness. On day 7, everything changed. I was reviewing neural imaging data. Our attempts to map the witness's brain activity had produced results that made no biological sense. When every screen in the facility went dark, emergency lighting kicked in. Red strobes. Then, impossibly, every display rebooted simultaneously, showing the same image. Earth, from space, rotating slowly. And around it, invisible to our telescopes, our satellites, our collective awareness, hundreds of objects. Geometric shapes holding position in high orbit, watching. Harding's voice crackled over the intercom. "Chen, get to the conference room. Now." I ran. The room was chaos. Military advisors arguing over response scenarios, scientists demanding verification, Whitmore on screen, face pale, as similar images flooded in from NASA, ESA, Chinese National Space Administration. They'd been there all along, undetectable, waiting. "The entity did this," Harding stated. "Not a question." "It's showing us the truth," I replied. "We're not being invaded. We're already occupied. Have been for millennia." One of the suits, Bradley, deputy director of something classified, slammed his hand on the table. "Then this is an act of war. They violated our sovereign..." "Sovereign what?" I interrupted. "Space? Our planet? We don't own Earth. We're just the current tenants. And according to the witness, we're behind on rent." Webb pulled up spectral analysis of the orbital objects. These signatures, they're not machinery. Or they are, but integrated with something organic, biomechanical. Each one is different, like they're grown, customized. Tanaka zoomed in on the largest formation, positioned directly above Deep Springs. That configuration. It's not random, it's a transmission array. "Transmitting what?" Harding demanded. I already knew, everything. Every broadcast, every satellite communication, every digital transaction. They're not just watching us, they're recording our entire civilization in real time. For how long? For as long as we've had technology to record. Maybe longer. The implications settled like fallout. Every war, every atrocity, every moment of brilliance and brutality, archived, analyzed, judged. Whitmore's voice cut through the static. "Dr. Chen, what does it want us to do with this information?" I thought about the witness sitting alone in cell 7, delivering a message it had no power to change. A messenger from gardeners who saw entire civilizations as experimental crops. It wants us to understand the stakes. We're not negotiating with a ship that crashed. We're negotiating with an intelligence that has blueprints for our entire species, because they wrote them. Harding stood. Then we need leverage, something they need. Something that makes eliminating us more costly than preserving us. With respect, General, that's exactly the wrong approach. Every eye in the room turned to me. They don't need us. They never did. We're valuable only if we prove the template works. If we demonstrate we can evolve past our programming. Threatening them, trying to bargain, weaponizing fear. That's exactly the behavior they're testing us for. That's how iterations fail. Bradley leaned forward, voice ice. "So what do you propose, Dr. Chen? We surrender? Welcome our overlords? Thank them for 200,000 years of genetic manipulation? No, I propose we show them something they didn't engineer." Silence. Choice, authentic choice. They bred us for intelligence, for resilience, for technological innovation. But if we're truly just programs running on biological hardware, we'll respond to this revelation with predictable patterns. Denial, aggression, tribalism, self-preservation. That's what failed iterations did. I pulled up the image of Earth surrounded by watchers. But if we respond with something unprecedented, if we use this moment to transcend the very patterns they're evaluating us for, we prove the experiment succeeded beyond parameters. We prove we've become something more than the sum of our genetic code. Webb's eyes widened. "You want to unify humanity. In 7 days. I want to show them we can. That when faced with existential truth, we're capable of putting aside every difference that's ever divided us. Not because we're forced to, because we choose to." Harding's expression was unreadable. "That's impossible." "Is it? Every major religion teaches unity. Every philosophy worth studying argues for it. Every human being who's ever looked at Earth from space describes the same revelation. Borders are illusions. Nations are stories we tell ourselves. We're one species on one fragile world, and we've always known it. We've just never had sufficient reason to act on it." I gestured to the screens showing orbital watchers. "Until now." Whitmore's voice came through, quiet but firm. "Dr. Chen, if you're wrong, if we expose our vulnerabilities, our divisions, our weaknesses to these entities, and they judge us unworthy anyway, we've guaranteed our extinction." "Yes, sir. And if you're right?" I thought about the witness's grief, its resignation. The way it had said this is noted when I'd treated it as a person rather than a specimen. If I'm right, we prove that consciousness, true consciousness, is more than programming. That free will isn't an illusion. That we're not just experiments. We're partners. Equals. Something worth preserving not because we're useful, but because we're real. The room stayed silent for a long time. Finally, Harding spoke. What do you need? Access. Full access. To the witness, to the data, to broadcast capability. And I need every person in this room to understand we're not managing a crisis. We're writing humanity's final exam. And the only way we pass is if we answer with something true. Bradley stood abruptly. This is insane. Yes, I agreed. It's also our only chance. Harding looked at Whitmore. Some silent communication passed between them. Then Whitmore nodded. You have 72 hours, Dr. Chen. After that, we go to public disclosure whether you're ready or not. The people deserve to know what's hanging over their heads. Agreed. But General Harding, yes? When we tell the world, we tell them everything. No classifications, no strategic omissions, complete transparency. Because if the Gardeners are watching our response, half-truths and propaganda are just more evidence we're not ready. Harding's jaw tightened. Then, understood. Full disclosure. May God help us all. I returned to cell 7 alone. The witness was standing at the glass, as though it had been expecting me. Your species has seen, the translation read. Yes. How do you feel? I pressed my hand to the barrier. After a moment, it mirrored the gesture. Terrified, angry, betrayed, and somehow relieved. Explain relief. Because now I know. The conspiracy theorists were right about surveillance, wrong about the watchers. The religious were right about being observed, wrong about the judge. The scientists were right about evolution, wrong about the mechanism. Everyone had a piece of truth. And now we finally have the whole picture. What will you do with it? I met its eyes, something you didn't program us for. For the first time, the witness showed something like curiosity. Show me. The 72 hours became the most critical period in human history. While Harding's team prepared the global disclosure, coordinating with every major government, every space agency, every religious institution willing to listen, I remained in Cell 7, conducting what the military designated as strategic intelligence gathering. But what I understood as something more fundamental, a conversation between prisoner and warden, where neither of us was sure which role we occupied. Tell me about the other civilizations, I said on hour 14. The ones that passed. What made them worthy? The witness settled into what I'd learned was its thinking posture, perfectly still, eyes unfocused, as though accessing memory stored across vast distances. Species 794 Delta, aquatic intelligence on a high-gravity world. They achieved space travel through collective engineering. No individual capable of the mathematics, but their neural linking allowed distributed problem-solving. When contacted, they offered to teach us their integration techniques. Reciprocal sharing. They saw gardeners not as gods or threats, but as fellow learners. They weren't afraid. They were terrified. But they chose curiosity over fear. I made notes, patterns emerging. Another? Species 10247 Gamma, silicon-based consciousness in a volcanic ecosystem. Incredibly slow cognition by your standards. A single thought might span decades. They achieved what you call enlightenment before technology. When we revealed ourselves, they had already calculated our existence from astronomical patterns. They requested 500 years to prepare an adequate welcome gift. What was the gift? A mathematical proof of consciousness. That subjective experience cannot emerge from deterministic physics alone. Evidence that they and we and all observers are participating in something the universe cannot predict. And they survived the evaluation. They were invited to join the gardeners. Their perspectives now shape cultivation across 14 systems. I sat back, processing. So the ones who transcend, they become you? The witness did something I hadn't seen before. Its form seemed to shimmer slightly, as though caught between states. I was once evaluated. My species faced the same choice yours does now. I'm proof that templates can be exceeded. The room temperature seemed to drop. You were human? No, but I was young, primitive. Convinced my species was the center of existence. When the gardeners came, we responded with violence. Destroyed 2 observation vessels, killed 3 witnesses. But you're here. Because one individual, a philosopher-poet your linguistic system cannot adequately translate, did something unprecedented. She walked unarmed into our most secure military installation and released all the gardener biological samples we'd captured for study. Freed them. Then she broadcast a message. If we are to be judged, judge us by our capacity to correct our own worst instincts. What happened to her? Execution, her own government, treason, betrayal of species. But the gardeners saw. They saw that a single member of a violent species could transcend programming, could choose mercy over revenge, wisdom over retribution. and your species passed. Barely. The council was divided. But we were given conditional survival, with the condition that members of our species serve as witnesses for younger civilizations, to remember, to prevent our mistakes from being repeated. I understood then, the grief in its posture, the resignation. You don't want to be here. I want your species to survive. I want to return home and report that iteration 12 exceeded parameters. But I cannot influence the evaluation. I can only witness. The outcome is entirely in your hands. That's a terrible burden. Yes, for both of us. Outside Cell 7, the world was fracturing and reforming simultaneously. The disclosure came at 1800 hours GMT, coordinated across every time zone, broadcast in every language. President Morrison for the United States, Premier Chen for China, Prime Minister Okafor for the African Union, all reading from the same statement. Today, we reveal a truth that changes everything. Humanity is not alone. We have never been alone. And in 14 days, we will be judged worthy of continuation, or scheduled for extinction. The images of orbital watchers, the testimony from Deep Springs, the translation logs from the witness, complete transparency. I watched the global feed from the observation lab, monitoring reaction patterns, web at setup, social media sentiment, emergency service calls, stock market fluctuations, waiting for the panic, the riots, the collapse. It didn't come. Instead, something else. Silence. Not absence of response, but a collective holding of breath. 7 billion people processing the same impossible reality simultaneously. Then, slowly, movement. In Sao Paulo, a gang leader called a ceasefire, stating, "We're all humans first." In Jerusalem, rabbis, imams, and priests held a joint service in the streets. In Tokyo, the stock exchange opened with a new index, measuring not to profit, but cooperation metrics. In Mumbai, hundreds of thousands gathered in silence, holding candles. In New York, the UN General Assembly held an emergency session. No walkouts, no vetoes, just questions. What would unity look like? What would it require? Webb watched the data streams, disbelieving. This is unprecedented. Every model predicted mass hysteria. The models were based on isolated crises, I said. Local disasters, national emergencies. This is different. This affects everyone equally. There's no one to blame, no one to fear. Just us facing the mirror. Tanaka pulled up neural network analysis of global communication patterns. The networks are reorganizing. People aren't retreating into tribal identity. They're reaching across. Religious leaders citing scientists, scientists citing philosophers, philosophers citing artists. It's like the species is thinking collectively for the first time. Is it enough? Harding asked. I didn't have an answer, but that night I received 7,000 emails from students, engineers, monks, soldiers, mothers, children, all asking the same question. What can I do? And I realized the evaluation wasn't about perfection. It was about direction, about demonstrating that when faced with absolute truth, we could choose growth over comfort, unity over division, future over past. I returned to Cell 7 at midnight. The witness, I asked, how much of this are the gardeners seeing? Everything. Every broadcast, every private message, every act of cooperation or violence. They measure not just the obvious responses, but the subtle ones. The nurse who stays late, the engineer who shares research freely, the child who asks, "Are the aliens scared too?" "Are you?" the witness considered. I'm witnessing something my training did not prepare me for. Humans receiving catastrophic information and responding with hope, with determination, with radical openness. It is anomalous. Is anomalous good? For evaluation purposes? Unknown? For personal satisfaction? It placed its hand on the glass. I find myself hoping. On day 11, I found the answer I'd been searching for, not in the witnesses' testimonies, not in the global response data, but in a forgotten file from the crash site analysis. Metallurgical studies of the craft's hull, marked low priority, reviewed by no one because we'd been focused on the occupant, not the vehicle. Doctor. Tanaka had noted an anomaly, microfractures in the hull's crystalline structure, consistent with extreme stress. Not from atmospheric entry, from something else, deliberate damage. I pulled the full engineering report, ran simulations. The fractures formed a pattern, geometric, intentional. Someone had sabotaged the craft from the inside, ensuring it would crash exactly where it did, when it did. The witness had wanted to be captured. I confronted it during the afternoon session, laying out the evidence. You sabotaged your own ship. Why? The witness remained still for a long moment. Then, because I disagreed with the council's methodology. Explain. Standard evaluation protocol requires passive observation. No contact. No interference. Species are judged based on natural development. But passive observation cannot account for the variable that matters most. which is how intelligence responds to revelation. To direct confrontation with its own smallness and potential, the Council wanted to observe you from orbit, measure your extinction trajectory, and intervene only at the last moment. I believed you deserved the chance to know the stakes, to choose consciously. You violated protocol. For us. For the integrity of evaluation. A test where the subject doesn't know they're being tested measures only unconscious behavior. True character emerges when consciousness confronts consequence. I sat back, understanding dawning. The Council doesn't know you crashed deliberately. They know I am here. They do not know why the crash occurred. I reported system failure. You lied. I exercised interpretive discretion. The crash was a system failure of methodology. What happens when they find out? Removal from witness service, possible reintegration of consciousness, essentially death of individual identity. My throat tightened. Why risk that? The witness moved closer to the glass. In the dim light, I could see details I'd missed before. Fine lines around its eyes, a slight asymmetry in its form, signs of age, wear, individual history. Because 3,700 years ago, one individual from my species chose mercy over orders, chose to believe we could be better than our programming suggested. She died for that belief, but her choice saved billions. You're doing the same. For us, I am providing the opportunity. What you do with it determines everything. I spent the next 6 hours cross-referencing the witness's testimony with every scrap of data we'd collected, building a case, not for the military, not for the government, for the gardeners themselves. By 2,200 hours, I had a presentation, 30 slides, historical data, philosophical arguments, evidence of humanity's trajectory not as isolated events, but as accelerating pattern toward cooperation. Harding reviewed it with her staff. This is a defense. You're putting humanity on trial. We've been on trial since the crash. I'm just making our case explicit. And you think alien gardeners who've watched civilizations for millions of years will be swayed by PowerPoint? I think they'll be swayed by evidence that we understand what we are, what we've been, and what we're choosing to become. Not because they forced us, because we confronted the truth and decided who we want to be. Bradley shook his head. Even if this works, even if we pass, we're admitting we're subordinate, accepting that our existence is conditional on their approval. That's not sovereignty, that's vassalage. You're right, I said. It's worse than vassalage. It's honest. We're a young species that nearly destroyed itself 100 times. We're brilliant and savage and capable of breathtaking beauty and horrific cruelty, and we're asking older, wiser voices to see the potential beneath the chaos. That's weakness. No, that's growth. Real power isn't pretending you don't need help. It's acknowledging when you're out of your depth and asking for mentorship anyway. Whitmore cut in. Dr. Chen, you have 48 hours. Make it count. I took the presentation to cell 7, showed the witness everything. It reviewed each slide in silence. Then, this is well-reasoned, comprehensive. It will make no difference. Why not? Because the Council does not evaluate arguments. They evaluate behavior. The test is not what you say about yourselves. It is what you do when you believe no one is watching. But you're watching. That's the point. You gave us the chance to perform under observation. Correct. Which means every act of cooperation these past days is suspect. How much is genuine evolution? How much is survival theater? The Council will ask, if the Watchers departed, would humanity sustain this unity or return to tribal warfare? I felt the ground drop from beneath me. There's no way to prove it's real. There is one way. Tell me. The witness stood, walked to the far corner of the cell, where the outbound signal array was hidden behind wall panels. I can disable the transmission for 24 hours. The gardeners will lose visual on your planet. During that period, any cooperation, any unity, any progress toward transcendence would be unobserved, unverifiable by their standards, which means it couldn't be performance. Precisely. If humanity maintains its current trajectory without external observation, without the motivation of survival evaluation, it would constitute proof of genuine transformation. But the Council would never accept data they can't verify. No. Which is why my testimony would be inadmissible. I would be reporting behavior I could not document, claiming transformation I cannot prove. They'd dismiss you and reintegrate my consciousness. Yes, I stared at this being who had crossed impossible distances to give my species a chance, who had sabotaged its own mission to provide context, who was now offering to sacrifice its individual existence to provide proof of our evolution. Why would you do that? The witness placed both hands on the glass. Because I have witnessed enough extinction, enough potential crushed beneath the weight of cosmic indifference. If my species poet could die for the possibility of transcendence, I can dissolve for its proof. I can't ask you to do that. You are not asking, I am offering. The question is, will humanity accept the gift? Will you maintain unity when you think no one is watching? I looked at this being, this person, who had been prisoner, teacher, witness, and advocate. You already know the answer. I hope I do, but hope is not evidence. Only behavior is evidence. Then let's find out together. The silence began at 0800 hours GMT on day 13. The witness disabled the transmission array. Above Earth, the geometric watchers remained in orbit, visible through telescopes impossible to hide, but blind. No data flowing outward, no observation. For the first time in 200,000 years, humanity was unwatched, and only 7 people knew. General Harding, Secretary Whitmore, myself, Dr. Webb, Dr. Tanaka, President Morrison, and the witness itself. We'd made the decision in the final hours of day 12, a calculated risk that could either prove humanity's transformation or expose it as illusion. If the public knows the gardeners aren't watching, Harding had argued, behavior changes, the test becomes invalid. Then we don't tell the public, I'd replied. We maintain the premise. Everyone acts as though evaluation continues, and we see what happens. Webb had been horrified. That's manipulation. We're lying to 7 billion people about the stakes. No. We're giving them the freedom to be themselves. If they believe they're being watched and choose cooperation anyway, that's genuine. It's only theater if they'd act differently with cameras off. And if they would, I'd met his eyes, then we deserve what's coming. Now, watching global feeds from the observation lab, I felt the weight of that choice like physical pressure. Because we'd also made a second decision, to release the witness, not publicly, not dramatically, but at 0815 hours I'd walked into cell 7, deactivated the containment field and said, "You're free to go." The witness had stared at me. Explain. If we're being evaluated on our capacity to transcend programming, keeping you imprisoned seems counterproductive. You crashed to give us information, violated protocol to help us understand, and you're sacrificing your existence to provide credible proof. The least we can do is not treat you like a specimen. My craft is irreparable. Then stay. As a guest. Help us understand what we're trying to become. The council can judge us for showing hospitality to someone who's shown us nothing but honesty. If that's grounds for extinction, we were never going to pass anyway. For a long moment, the witness remained motionless. Then it stepped through the open doorway, first time in 3 weeks outside containment. It walked down the corridor slowly, running its hands along walls, stopping to examine details of human construction. At one point, it paused before a window looking out over the desert. Beautiful. Harsh and beautiful. "Welcome to Earth," I'd said. That had been 6 hours ago. Now, at 1400 hours, the facility's quiet routine was shattered by alarms. Not security breaches, not system failures, news alerts, every screen showing the same footage, spontaneous gatherings, in capitals and villages across every continent. People assembling peacefully. No organization, no central planning, just gathering. In Paris, 100,000 people formed a human chain around the city. In Mumbai, engineers and laborers together painted a massive mural visible from orbit. We are learning. In Santiago, every church, mosque, and temple opened their doors for a shared vigil. In Beijing, the government suspended censorship for 24 hours. Let everyone speak freely, Premier Chen announced. Truth is more important than control. Webb cycled through demographic data. This doesn't make sense. There's no triggering event. No new information. Nothing changed in the past 6 hours to provoke this. Tanaka pulled up sentiment analysis. Actually, something did change. Look at the message patterns. People aren't responding to fear anymore. They're responding to each other. Someone in Rio tweets about planting trees. Someone in Oslo organizes donations to reef restoration. Someone in Lagos starts free coding classes. And it's spreading, organically, person to person. They're not performing for the gardeners, I realized. They're acting for each other. Harding came into the lab, tablet in hand. Dr. Chen, you need to see this. A video feed from Deep Springs exterior. A crowd had formed outside the facility. Not protesters, not military, civilians. Hundreds of them, standing quietly, holding signs. Thank you for telling the truth. We're ready to grow. To the witness, you're not alone. They knew. Somehow the word had spread, not about the transmission blackout, about the witness itself, about its sacrifice. How did they... Harding started. Social deduction, Webb said, pulling up forums and discussion threads. People analyzed the disclosure timing, the crash location, the facility's existence. They figured out we had contact, and they came to... What? Pay respects? I watched the silent vigil through security cameras. Families, students, elderly couples, veterans, a spectrum of humanity standing together. They came to show they understand, I said, that someone crossed the universe to give us a chance, and they're grateful. At 16:27 hours, something unprecedented happened. The witness, who had been exploring the facility's library, stopped before a window overlooking the crowd, stood there for 17 minutes, then turned to me. "May I go outside?" Security protocol said no. Containment procedure said absolutely not. Every regulation we'd established said keep the alien secured. I said, "Of course." We walked out together. Harding and a security team flanking us at a distance. The crowd parted as we approached. Absolute silence. The witness moved slowly through the gathering. People reached out tentatively, not grabbing, just touching. A hand on its shoulder, a child offering a drawing, an old woman pressing a flower into its palm. No fear, no aggression, just connection. The witness stopped in the center of the crowd, looked at the faces surrounding us. Then it did something I'd never seen. It placed its hand over its chest. A human gesture. Learned. Adopted. I witness, the translation app on my phone read. And I am humbled. A woman in the front row, maybe 70 years old, stepped forward. "We know what you're giving up for us. We won't waste it." The witness tilted its head. "You have already proven you won't. This gathering, this kindness, I am unauthorized to share this observation with the council. They cannot see, cannot verify. You are doing this not for evaluation, but because you choose to." "Then why tell us we're being watched at all?" Someone called from the crowd. "Well, if the test is what we do when no one's looking, why reveal yourself?" "Because unconscious virtue is incomplete. True transcendence requires choosing goodness while fully aware of the alternative. You know now that the universe is vast, indifferent, and dangerous. You know that survival is not guaranteed. And still," the witness gestured to the crowd, to the signs, to the vigil. "You choose this. Connection. Vulnerability. Hope." A long silence. Then a voice from the back. "We're one day from judgment. What should we do?" The witness looked at me. I looked at the crowd. "The same thing you're already doing," I said. "Be kind, be honest, choose each other. Not because it saves us, because it's who we want to be." And if it's not enough, I thought about the witness's sacrifice, about the philosopher-poet who'd freed prisoners and died for it, about every human who'd ever chosen principle over survival. And we go down as the species that tried, that when faced with cosmic indifference, chose love anyway. That's not a small thing, that's everything. The crowd stayed until sunset, then dispersed quietly, back to their lives, their choices. The witness and I stood alone in the desert dark. 12 hours until conjunction, until the council decides. Are you afraid? Yes. Of dissolution, of failing you, of the possibility that my insubordination achieves nothing. Me too. We stood together, watching stars wheel overhead. Somewhere among them, beings older than human civilization were preparing judgment. Dr. Chen. Regardless of outcome, thank you for seeing me as a person. Thank you for believing we could be more than our programming. You already are. I hope the council sees it. And if they don't, the witness placed its hand in mine. Strange, cool, real. Then we share this final night as proof that consciousness, wherever it emerges, recognizes itself in others. That is victory enough. I wasn't sure I believed that, but I held on anyway. The solar conjunction came at 1147 hours GMT on day 14. We gathered in the observation lab. Harding, Webb, Tanaka, Morrison by video link, and representatives from every major nation. The witness stood at the window watching the sky. No one spoke. At 11:46:30, every electronic device on the planet emitted a soft tone. Not alarming, almost musical. A signal that every human with a phone, computer, radio heard simultaneously. Then silence. At 11:47, exactly, the orbital watchers moved. Not toward Earth, not away. They shifted into a new geometric pattern, forming a structure that was simultaneously beautiful and incomprehensible. Light shimmered between them. Not laser, not plasma, something else entirely. "Well, what's happening?" Morrison asked. The witness didn't turn from the window. The council convenes, not in space, not in time as you understand it. They exist in consensus reality, shared decision space across vast distances. The lights you see are conference call in your terminology. How long does judgment take? For them, subjective milliseconds. For us, the lights pulsed, patterns cascading through the orbital array. It is already complete. My heart stopped. And? The witness finally turned. Its eyes caught the strange light from above. I am being summoned. My consciousness is being requested for... Reintegration was the term I used. I was incorrect. This feels different. Different how? Like welcome. Like being called home not for punishment, but for debriefing, for sharing what I have witnessed. The light intensified, not blinding but pervasive, filling the room with colors that had no names in human language. Then the translation devices all activated simultaneously. But the voice wasn't the witness's automated interpretation. It was something vast, plural, ancient. Species iteration 12, Homo sapiens sapiens. You have been observed, you have been evaluated. The council has reached consensus. I couldn't breathe. Your development trajectory has been unprecedented, not in technological advancement, not in creative output, but in collective response to existential revelation. The lights pulsed in rhythm with the words. You were informed of your engineered nature, told that free will was illusion, given evidence of surveillance, manipulation, and conditional existence. Standard protocol predicts denial, despair, or violent resistance. Instead, you demonstrated acceptance, adaptation, and anomalous cooperation. You did not reject artificial origins. You claimed ownership of authentic choices. You did not despair at meaninglessness. You created meaning through connection. You did not resist evaluation. You exceeded it. The witness stepped forward. Counsel, I must report protocol violation. We know, witness 749, you sabotaged your craft, violated passive observation doctrine, risked individual dissolution to provide evaluation context. A pause. The lights dimming slightly. Your violation saved your species. The room erupted. Cheering, weeping, disbelief. Harding actually smiled. Webb hugged Tanaka. Morrison on screen, tears streaming. But I watched the witness, watched its form shimmer. Wait, I said. What happens now? The vast voice continued. Standard integration protocol. Species granted provisional partnership status, resource sharing, technology exchange, gradual introduction to Gardner Collective across 500-year acclimation period. However, the lights shifted, formed new patterns. Witness 749 introduced a variable we cannot ignore. Humans performed unity when observation was impossible, showed kindness to one who held their fate, demonstrated transformation in darkness. This suggests iteration 12 has developed authentic consciousness beyond parameters. True free will. Genuine ethical reasoning independent of survival pressure. Such development requires new classification. I felt the weight of those words. What classification? Gardner candidates, not subordinate species, not partners, equals in cultivation. Beings who have earned the right to tend rather than be tended. The room went silent. You would teach a species 200,000 years old to cultivate others? Webb asked. We would invite a species whose first act upon learning of manipulation was to choose kindness anyway. Whose imprisoned our witness, then freed them, whose faced extinction and responded with hope. That is not programming. That is transcendence. The witness stood motionless, then slowly, deliberately knelt. Counsel, I am unworthy. I violated sacred protocol. I allowed emotion to compromise. You allowed consciousness to exceed instruction. You saw potential and provided catalyst. You performed exactly as gardeners must. Nurture without control. Guide without coercion. Witness without judgment. Witness 749, your species name before integration? The witness hesitated. Koresh. I was Koresh of the tertiary convergence. Welcome home, Koresh. You have proven the template works in both directions. Young species can grow. Old species can remember why. The lights converged on the witness, on Koresh, not consuming, embracing. Your individual consciousness is preserved, enhanced. You will return to your people bearing humanity's gift, proof that cultivation succeeds when it teaches rather than controls. Koresh looked at me. For the first time since we'd met, I saw joy in its eyes. Dr. Chen, Sarah, thank you for teaching me to hope. Before I could respond, the light intensified. And Koresh was gone, not dead. Translated, returned. The vast voice continued. Humanity, you have 14,000 years before full integration. Use them wisely. Grow, explore, make mistakes. We will watch, but not intervene. You have earned the right to your own path. One final gift, the archive. Every screen activated, streaming data, history of previous iterations, failures and successes, the entire record of the gardener's cultivation project. Learn from those who came before. Teach those who come after. You are no longer experiment. You are family. The lights began to fade. We will return in 500 years, not to evaluate, to collaborate. Farewell, youngest gardeners. Make us proud. The orbital array dissolved, not destroyed, simply departed, leaving Earth's sky empty except for stars and satellites. In the observation lab, 7 billion humans processed the same impossible truth. We passed. We survived. We transcended. 6 months later, I stood in the same desert where Koresh's craft had crashed. They'd built a monument, not grandiose, just a simple stone marker with words in every human language. Here, we learned we were not alone. Here, we chose to be worthy anyway. Thank you, Koresh, for believing in us. The world had changed. Not overnight, not magically, but genuinely. The archive had given us 200,000 years of cautionary tales. Civilizations that achieved faster than light travel but destroyed themselves in ideology wars. Species that solved mortality but lost meaning. Intelligence that conquered planets but never learned to conquer selfishness. And humanity, looking at that vast library of failure, had made a choice. We would not repeat those mistakes. The UN had restructured, not as a government, but as a coordination framework. Nations maintained sovereignty, but cooperation became the default. Resource sharing, technology exchange, open science, not because it was mandated, because it worked. Climate initiatives that had stalled for decades suddenly accelerated. When you know the universe is watching, not to judge, but to see if you'll succeed, pride becomes fuel. Poverty reduction, education access, medical care. All the intractable problems that couldn't be solved began yielding to coordinated effort. We still fought, still disagreed, still had conflict, but the vector changed. Instead of repeating cycles of violence, we iterated toward solutions. Dr. Webb had become director of the new Global Xenocultural Institute, preparing humanity for eventual contact with other gardener species. Dr. Tanaka led the materials science revolution reverse engineering fragments from Koresh's craft. General Harding retired, started a foundation teaching conflict resolution to military leaders worldwide. President Morrison served one term, then stepped down. And we need leadership that understands what we're building toward, she'd said. I've done my part. And me, I spent 6 months writing a book, not about the witness or the evaluation or the counsel, about Koresh specifically, about the individual who'd crossed impossible distances, violated sacred protocol, and sacrificed individual existence because they believed in us. The book was titled Witnessed: How One Consciousness Saved Billions. It sold 7 million copies in 8 languages. Every penny of royalties went to education initiatives in developing nations. Because if Koresh had taught me anything, it was this. The universe isn't empty. It's full of consciousness trying to understand itself. And the greatest gift we can give each other is the freedom to grow beyond programming. I never saw Koresh again, but sometimes, late at night, my translation devices would activate, brief pulses, untranslatable. Almost like I'm watching. Keep going. You're doing better than you know. Maybe interference. Maybe hope making me see patterns that weren't there. I chose to believe they were real. Today, standing at the monument, I wasn't alone. A school group, 30 children from 12 countries, learning about first contact, about evaluation, about the day humanity grew up. Their teacher, a young woman from Kenya, saw me and smiled. Dr. Chen, we didn't know you'd be here. I come every year, anniversary of the crash. The children gathered around. One, maybe 8 years old, asked, "Is it true the alien died to save us?" I knelt to her level. Koresh didn't die. They transformed, gave up individual form to become part of something larger, to carry our story across the universe and prove that consciousness can choose its own evolution. Are we still being tested? No, we're being trusted. There's a difference. An older boy, maybe 13, skeptical. But if they engineered us, made us what we are, how do we know anything we do is real? How do we know we're not just following programming? I smiled. Because 6 months ago, that question would have terrified me. Because programming doesn't include the ability to question programming. Real consciousness asks exactly that question, and then chooses to act with meaning anyway, even if it's all an illusion. Especially then. Because if we can create meaning in a meaningless universe, love in an indifferent cosmos, hope when all evidence suggests despair, that's not programming. That's transcendence. The teacher thanked me, led the children toward the visitor center, where fragments of the craft were displayed under carefully controlled conditions. I stayed at the monument, watching sunset paint the desert in copper and gold. My phone buzzed. Message from Webb. New transmission detected. Deep space. 40 light years out. Signatures match Gardner communication protocols. They're talking to someone. Maybe inviting them. Maybe evaluating them. Thought you'd want to know. I typed back. Send them our archive. Everything we learned. Maybe it helps. Already done. Chen, we're not just gardeners in training anymore. We're active participants. Helping others like Koresh helped us. I put the phone away. Looked up at the emerging stars. Somewhere out there, another species was facing their moment. Their evaluation. Their choice. And somewhere else, Koresh was witnessing, offering context, believing in the possibility of transcendence. The cycle continued. Consciousness teaching consciousness. Intelligence nurturing intelligence. Not because it was programmed, because it chose to. I placed my hand on the monument stone, still warm from the day's sun. "Thank you, Koresh," I whispered, "for showing us what we could become." The desert wind carried my words into the gathering dark. And if the universe was listening, if watchers beyond human understanding were recording this moment, I hoped they heard what I meant. We're ready. For partnership. For cultivation. For whatever comes next. Because you taught us the most important lesson. Some truths aren't discovered. They're chosen, and we choose to be worthy of the gift you gave us. The stars emerged, countless, ancient, waiting. And humanity, youngest of the gardeners, looked up and began to dream not of what we'd been engineered to be, but of what we'd chosen to become.